Hi, and welcome to the Infinity Saga. Now, whether you are a long-time Marvel fan or experiencing the MCU for the very first time, I just want to say welcome. We are about to embark on a phenomenal journey of storytelling, and I'm super excited to take you on this journey with me. Now, may I remind you that this timeline will not include shows like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. and Daredevil, even though they run parallel to the events of the Infinity Saga. If you want to find out how these shows connect to the movies we are about to watch, then you may do so in the side quest videos. Furthermore, there will be spoilers as I will be making connections from one movie to the next. And as a heads up, this will take you approximately 51 hours and 4 minutes to complete the Infinity Saga. Now, let's strap in, get some popcorn, and let's get started.
First, we're going to watch Eyes of Wakanda, a show that takes us through the history of Wakanda and the War Dogs. Set between 1260 BC and 1896 AD, we followed the adventures of Noni, Memnon, Basha, and Jarani, also known as Iron Fist. The show influences and sets up the events seen later in the film Black Panther.
Next, we're going to watch Captain America: The First Avenger, and while the bookends of this film takes place in present day, the majority of the movie is set during World War II, from 1942 to 1945. We follow a scrawny Steve Rogers as he goes on a journey to become the iconic Captain America. And here we're introduced to an array of characters such as Bucky Barnes, Peggy Carter, Howard Stark, and Dum Dum Dugan. And joining this cast we have some notable villains such as Johann Schmidt, aka the Red Skull, and Arnim Zola. Now, throughout the Infinity Saga, you will be presented with some pretty important artifacts, and in this instance we are introduced to an artifact known as the Tesseract. It is also worth mentioning that all of the Marvel movies will contain an end credit scene, so it's definitely worth hanging around till the very end. Next, we are going to watch the Agent Carter one-shot. This short film takes place 1 year after the events of Captain America: The First Avenger, as we find out what Peggy Carter is up to once the war has ended. Characters such as Howard Stark and Dum Dum Dugan return, and we hear for the very first time an organization known as S.H.I.E.L.D. Next, we're going to watch Captain Marvel. Set in 1995, we follow Carol Danvers as she unravels the truth behind her mysterious origin. And here we are introduced to two alien races, the first being the Kree, which include characters such as Ronan the Accuser, Korath the Pursuer, and Yon-Rogg, and the other alien race known as the Skrulls, which include Talos and his daughter Gaia. Now, alongside these characters we have Maria Rambeau and her daughter Monica, and younger versions of Nick Fury and Agent Coulson. Oh, and remember the Tesseract, which we saw back in Captain America: The First Avenger, well, that pops up again here. Now, this movie has two end credit scenes. The first end credit scene takes place after the events of Avengers Infinity War, so it's best to watch that later. The second end credit scene takes place after the events of this film, so you can go ahead and watch that. Next on our timeline is Iron Man, and here we are introduced to a character by the name of Tony Stark, a billionaire genius who goes from weapons manufacturer to a superhero legend. And joining Tony Stark we have an ensemble of characters such as Colonel James Rhodes, Pepper Potts, Obadiah Stane, and Christine Everhart, a journalist from Vanity Fair. And returning from Captain Marvel, we have a slightly older Agent Coulson. Now, if you look carefully, you may notice this logo scattered throughout the film, an organization known as the Ten Rings, which will be explored much later down the track. And if you hang around for the end credit scene, you are in for a very pleasant surprise. Taking place 6 months after the events of Iron Man 1, we see the return of Tony Stark, Pepper Potts, Agent Coulson, Nick Fury, and Colonel James Rhodes, now played by a different actor, Don Cheadle. And introduced for the very first time, we have Natasha Romanoff, also known as Black Widow. Now, the events of Iron Man 2, The Incredible Hulk, and Thor all happen within the span of a week, and this is known as Fury's Big Week. If you look at the screens behind Tony Stark and Nick Fury, you notice footage from an incident at Culver University. This has been directly taken from the film The Incredible Hulk, and the end credits scene makes connections to the character Thor. Next on our watch is A Funny Thing Happened on the Way to Thor's Hammer one-shot. This short film documents Agent Coulson's journey from when he left Tony Stark in Iron Man 2 to when we see him pop up again in the movie Thor. This short film shows us that Agent Coulson can indeed kick some butt and that he loves frosted donuts. Next on our timeline is The Incredible Hulk, and here we follow Bruce Banner as he tries to find a cure for his monstrous condition. Joining Bruce, we have General Thaddeus Ross and his daughter Betty, Samuel Stearns, and Emil Blonsky, also known as The Abomination. Now, there are several references to the original TV show The Incredible Hulk, starring Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno, notably through the score and a cameo by the Incredible Hulk himself, Lou Ferrigno. Now, you might be wondering whether you need to watch The Incredible Hulk show as part of your MCU watch, and my answer to that question would be a no. There is also no end credit scene for this film, although there is a before credit scene which sees the return of Tony Stark. Next, we're going to watch The Consultant one-shot, which sees the return of Agent Phil Coulson and introducing us to a new agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., Jasper Sitwell. This short film gives us a bit more context and resolution to the final scene we saw with Tony Stark at the end of The Incredible Hulk. Taking place in the realm of Asgard, we are introduced to a character by the name of Thor, and joining him we have a large ensemble cast such as Loki, Heimdall, the Warriors 3 and Lady Sif, as well as Jane Foster, Eric Selvig, Darcy Lewis and Clint Barton, the Avenger known as Hawkeye. Oh, and remember Agent Phil Coulson? Yes, he comes back here as well. Now, the end credit scene sees the return of Nick Fury and the artifact known as the Tesseract. Now, the moment you've all been waiting for, The Avengers. This film unites Captain America, Iron Man, Black Widow, Hawkeye, Thor and the Incredible Hulk, now played by a different actor, Mark Ruffalo, as they come together to fight the villain Loki. And returning from previous franchises, we have Nick Fury, Agent Phil Coulson, Pepper Potts and Eric Selvig, and introduced for the first time, Maria Hill. Now remember the Tesseract that we've been seeing pop up from film to film? Well, that makes a comeback here. And on top of that, we are introduced to a new artifact in the form of Loki's scepter. Now, there are two end credit scenes for this film. The first gives us the introduction of our main antagonist for the entire Infinity Saga, and the second end credit scene sees our Avengers eating shawarma. Following the events of the Avengers, we're going to watch Item 47 one-shot. Here we see two criminals, Benny and Claire, rob several banks after discovering a Chitauri weapon left behind after the battle with the Avengers. Agent Sitwell returns to sort them out, and we're introduced to a new agent of S.H.I.E.L.D., Felix Blake, whom you will see again in Side Quest A, the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. saga. Set in 2013, we're going to watch Thor: The Dark World, as we find out the consequences that Loki must face after Thor takes Loki and the Tesseract back to Asgard. Now, there are strong arguments to put Iron Man 3 ahead of Thor: The Dark World, but for the sake of narrative flow, it is better to follow Loki through from the end of the Avengers over to Thor: The Dark World. Now, most of the characters from the first Thor film returns here, as well as introducing us to several new ones, such as the Dark Elf Malekith and Algrim, also known as Curse. And while we keep some important artifacts in the back of our minds, such as the Tesseract and Loki's scepter, we are presented with a new one here in the form of the Aether. The end credit scene introduces us to the Collector, and we find out that both the Tesseract and the Aether both contain an Infinity Stone. Next on our timeline is Iron Man 3, as we watch Tony Stark navigate through his PTSD after the events of the Avengers. Returning, we have Pepper Potts and Colonel James Rhodes, and new characters such as Maya Hansen, Aldrich Killian, a little kid by the name of Harley. Don't forget about this kid because he will pop up again, and a version of the Mandarin played by a washed-up actor, Trevor Slattery. As we learn more about the history of Trevor Slattery, we're going to watch All Hail the King one-shot. Here, the organization known as the Ten Rings are not happy that Trevor have been impersonating the Mandarin. and therefore sends in a character by the name of Jackson Norris, also known in the comic books as Nighthawk, to break him out and make him answer for his crimes. Oh, and remember Justin Hammer, whom we met in Iron Man 2, he makes a cameo here as well. Next, we are going to watch Captain America the Winter Soldier, as we see Steve Rogers navigate through life in this new, modern world. Returning, we have Nick Fury, Maria Hill, Black Widow, Bucky Barnes, and Arnim Zola, whom we last saw back in Captain America the First Avenger. And introduced for the very first time, Sharon Carter and Sam Wilson, also known as Falcon. Now, the events of this film significantly impacts the organization known as S.H.I.E.L.D., and you'll get to see this explored further in Side Quest A, the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. saga. The end credit scene introduces us to Baron von Strucker and two new mysterious characters, Wanda and Pietro Maximoff. Set in 2014, we are going to watch Guardians of the Galaxy, a ragtag team which consists of Peter Quill, also known as Star-Lord, Gamora, Drax the Destroyer, Rocket, and Groot. Returning from Captain Marvel, we have Korath the Pursuer and Ronan the Accuser, and from the end credit scene of Thor the Dark World, we see the return of the Collector. Now in this film, we learn that there are 6 Infinity Stones, to which we've already been introduced to 2, in the form of the Tesseract and the Ether. In this film, we find out that there is a third one contained in an artifact known as the Orb. And who's after these 6 Infinity Stones? Well, it's a character that goes by the name of Thanos. Next, we are going to watch I Am Groot Seasons 1 and 2. Now, these are short 5-minute episodes which explores the adventures of Baby Groot as he grows up in this vast universe. Following Baby Groot, we're going to watch Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2, which takes place several months after the first film. Of course, our original team returns alongside Yondu and Nebula, and joining the cast for the first time we have Mantis, Ego the Living Planet, and Ayesha. Now, there are 5 post-credit scenes for this film, so just like Pokemon, make sure you catch them all. Jumping over to 2015, we're going to watch The Avengers Age of Ultron. Here, Captain America, Iron Man, Thor, Black Widow, Hawkeye, and the Incredible Hulk reunite to fight the sentient being known as Ultron. Returning from previous films, we have Nick Fury, Maria Hill, Sam Wilson, and Colonel James Rhodes' War Machine. We explore further the mysterious characters of Wanda and Pietro Maximoff, as well as being introduced to new characters such as Vision and Ulysses Klaue. Now remember Loki's scepter, which we last saw at the end credit scene of Captain America the Winter Soldier? Well, that contains our 4th Infinity Stone. Next, we are going to watch WHIH Newsfront episodes 1 to 4. Now, this is a web series which you can find on YouTube, which sees the return of Christine Everhart, a character whom we were introduced to back in the first Iron Man film. WHIH is an in-universe news network which reports on the MCU's current affairs, and in this instance, we see Christine report on the relief efforts after the Avengers fought Ultron in Sokovia. Episode 4 sees Christine interview a prison inmate, Scott Lang, who will later be known as Ant-Man. As Scott Lang is being released from prison, we follow him on a journey as he becomes the superhero known as Ant-Man. Here, we are introduced to Hank Pym and his daughter Hope Van Dyne, Cassie Lang, and Darren Cross, also known as Yellow Jacket. As the new Avengers facility has been relocated to upstate New York, we do get a cameo from Falcon himself, and the end credit scene takes us right up to our next film, Captain America Civil War. Next, we are going to watch WHIH Newsfront episodes 5 to 9. Here we see the return of Christine Everhart as she and her co-host discuss on whether the Avengers need to be held accountable for the destruction left behind after the events of Captain America the Winter Soldier and the Avengers Age of Ultron. We hear that President Ellis, whom we last saw in Iron Man 3, and General Ross, whom we last saw in The Incredible Hulk, have met up to discuss future plans on how to monitor superheroes. And the final episode reports on the disaster in Lagos, Nigeria, which will be explored further in Captain America Civil War. Next, we are going to watch Captain America Civil War. As the Sokovia Accords have been introduced, we see a divide in the superhero community and a sever in the relationship between Tony Stark and Steve Rogers. We are introduced to characters such as Everett Ross and Helmut Zemo, and two iconic Marvel characters, Peter Parker's Spider-Man and T'Challa's Black Panther. Next, we are going to watch Black Widow. Now, the entirety of this film takes place within the last half of Captain America Civil War. From when Natasha leaves the Avengers compound to when Steve Rogers breaks out the Rogue Avengers from the prison known as the Raft. We are introduced to new characters such as Yelena Belova and Alexei, also known as Red Guardian. We are also introduced to a character by the name of Dreykov, whom we hear Loki mention to Natasha in the first Avengers film. Now, the end credits scene is a massive spoiler for Avengers Endgame, and I would suggest that you skip this one entirely and watch it after Avengers Endgame. Taking place 1 week after the events of Captain America Civil War, we're going to watch Black Panther, as we explore the nation known as Wakanda. Joining Black Panther, we have an amazing cast of characters such as Shuri, Okoye, Nakia, M'Baku, and Eric Killmonger, and returning from Avengers Age of Ultron, Ulysses Klaue, and from Captain America Civil War, Everett Ross. Taking place 2 months after the events of Captain America Civil War, we're going to watch Spider-Man Homecoming. Now, there's a title card that says that this film takes place 8 years after the events of the first Avengers film. This is wrong. It should be 4 years instead. As we see the return of Peter Parker, Aunt May, as well as Tony Stark, we're introduced to Ned Leeds, Betty Brant, Michelle Jones, MJ, as well as Adrian Toomes, also known as Vulture. Scattered throughout the film, we have cameos from some of the most iconic Spider-Man villains, such as Matt Gargan, also known as Scorpion, 2 versions of The Shocker, and Aaron Davis, also known as the Prowler, the uncle to Miles Morales. Next, we're going to watch Doctor Strange, as we follow a character by the name of Stephen Strange and his road to recovery after a horrible accident. We're introduced to new characters such as Wong, the Ancient One, Baron Mordo, and Christine Palmer, and villains Caecilius and Dormammu. Now, this film presents us with another artifact, the Eye of Agamotto, which contains our 5th Infinity Stone. And the end credit scene sees the return of the Avenger, Thor. Next, we're going to watch Thor Ragnarok, which takes place 2 years after the events of the Avengers Age of Ultron. We see the return of Bruce Banner, Doctor Strange, Loki, Heimdall, and Odin, and introduce for the first time Hela, the Grandmaster, Valkyrie, Korg, and Surtur. Now, the first post-credit scene occurs right before the third Avengers film, The Avengers Infinity War. Taking place 2 years after Captain America Civil War, we're going to watch Ant-Man and the Wasp, as Scott Lang is towards the end of his 2-year house arrest. Returning, we have Hank Pym and Hope Van Dyne, and new characters are introduced, such as Bill Foster, Janet Van Dyne, and a character by the name of Ghost. Now, there are 2 end credit scenes for this film, which takes place after the events of Avengers Infinity War, so it's best to watch that then. Now, we have reached the 2-part finale of the Infinity Saga with the Avengers Infinity War. As Thanos goes on his quest to collect all 6 Infinity Stones, we see many characters from the films previously watched come together as they fight for the Battle of Earth. The 6th Infinity Stone is introduced here, and the end credit scenes for Captain Marvel and Ant-Man and the Wasp is best watched after this film. Next, we're going to watch the finale of the Infinity Saga, Avengers Endgame. This film concludes many of the stories and character arcs that we saw all the way back from Captain America, the First Avenger. Many characters return from various franchises, such as Harley, the little kid we met back in Iron Man 3. Once you have finished watching this film, you may go ahead and watch the end credits scene from Black Widow, which introduces us to a crucial character, Valentina Allegra de Fontaine. Congratulations, you've just completed the Infinity Saga. Now, where to from here? Well, if you've fallen in love with the MCU, and have the time to do a deep dive, I would highly suggest you complete the side quests. Side quest A is the Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. saga, which includes 2 seasons of Agent Carter, 7 seasons of Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., and 1 season of Inhumans. These shows make direct connections to the films we have just watched, and we may find characters from this side quest pop up again in the future. Side quest B is the Defenders saga. Now this is a more dark and extremely violent side of the MCU. However, I would highly suggest you complete this side quest, as many characters from this saga will pop up again in future films and TV shows. Then there is side quest C, to which I would like to call it the Teenage Angst saga, which consists of 2 seasons of Cloak and Dagger and 3 seasons of Runaways. These shows make direct connections to side quest A and B, so I would highly encourage you watch this after the previous 2. Now, if you don't have the time to do this side quest, that's okay as well, and you may continue along with our main quest with the first part of the multiverse saga, starting with Loki Season 1. Whichever direction you choose to take in this vast multiverse, that is up to you. So, I'll see you all in the next video.